Spider-Man as a character has always been someone to look up to. He's cool, he's nerdy, he's witty, super smart, extremely relatable, and he's got a big heart. It makes sense why there's so much talk surrounding the character. I mean, go into the streets and walk up to a random elderly lady and ask her who Spider-Man is, and there is almost no way she'll say she doesn't know. This is a character we all love, and a character that needs to be studied deeper if so many people claim him to be their favorite superhero. As a result of that, there are debates all of the time of how he should be portrayed. But sometimes we need to take a step back and look at how he is being portrayed and analyze that rather than discussing how he should be portrayed. Specifically, we're going to look into Insomniacs' version of the character. Now, Peter is already well into his career as Spider-Man in the first game, having experienced all of the growing pains and facing a lot of his most iconic villains before the title screen is even seen. Between the two games Peter is actually in, he faces off against his version of the Sinister Six, trains up an heir to the mantle of Spider-Man, locks up one of his longtime foes, gets betrayed by his mentor, struggles against his best friend's health issues and what that entails, and of course, we get the classic symbiote storyline, which leads us into the discussion specifically in this video. Now, it's easy to just say, the symbiote is bad and makes Peter mean, but it's deeper than that. I also want to address the very popular analogy made for the symbiote, addiction. I believe this is a good way to look at it, and it is an accurate way, but I want to look at a different aspect of it, rather looking at what the addiction to the symbiote changes about Peter. The addiction aspect has been talked about to death, so I don't want to beat a dead horse with this video. With that being said, let's take a look at what a symbiote is. In real life, a symbiotic relationship would have two creatures living together in some way that is beneficial to both parties. The most well-known example of this is the clownfish with the sea anemone. The clownfish gets protection from predators and the sea anemone gets cleaning. There are tons of examples of this I can give in nature, but this gives a good idea of what a symbiotic relationship should look like. But that isn't what happens between Venom and Peter, and it almost never is. The symbiote is the only one that ever ends up benefiting, but how is Peter portrayed outside of the symbiote to begin with? Peter starts off his story already showing where his priorities are: the city. Watching the opening cinematic tells the player a lot about Peter and his life to start off with. He's late for rent, and he ignores it because he sees that there is a police alert from his phone. These two details alone already show his irresponsibility in terms of his own life, but the sense of responsibility he holds himself to for the well-being of the city. His room is filthy with old containers of food all over the place and trash everywhere, but we also see he does a lot of his experimenting on his gear in his apartment, going as far as automating his toaster to make it just that little bit faster to eat in the morning. He's broke and doesn't have his life together, which is right where most people want to see Peter because that's all he's ever been in the comics realistically. However, following this opening cinematic, we see Peter trying to lock up Fisk, which is a villain he has been wrestling with for years at this point. He eventually is able to lock him up, but while doing so, you can really tell that he wants to get back at Fisk and is glad to see him gone. Throughout the story, we see Peter wrestle with a lot of what Aunt May refers to as Parker pride, and this is where Peter's eventual downfall in the story across the two games stems from. But taking a step further back, let's look at pride in the Bible a little bit as well. King Nebuchadnezzar, a name a lot of people know who grew up in church and heard in Sunday school. Specifically in Daniel chapter 4, we see his own pride get in the way. In this chapter, we see that Nebuchadnezzar has a very expansive kingdom, and he starts it off right by praising God for it, recognizing that it is from God that he received the kingdom in the first place. But when he has a dream that he doesn't understand, things go south for him. Daniel has to interpret it for him so he can understand what's going on. And for those who don't know the rest of the story, hang tight, we'll be back. Nebuchadnezzar is starting off his perspective right, focused on God and giving glory to him. Likewise, Peter is also starting his perspective off right, and we see his perspective in the entire story stay pretty consistent on other people and helping them. But we also see a shift at one point where for a little while, all he does care about is himself and having the symbiote. Peter has a big heart for those he loves, and we see across a lot of Spider-Man media, including these games, that if you hurt someone who Peter loves, he's not going to hold back, and Spider-Man won't be the one that's fighting. We see this in No Way Home as well at the end when Tom Holland's Spider-Man is fighting Green Goblin. He kills Aunt May, and while Peter is hanging onto Goblin's glider, Peter starts ripping parts off of it to grab a bomb and throw it at him. At this point, Peter also thinks that MJ is dead, and so he isn't holding back, and Spider-Man's no-kill policy is out the window because it's Peter that's fighting, not Spider-Man. This is a continual issue that we see in Spider-Man stories as well because we see it in the first Insomniac game. Usually, Peter has a heart to try and cure his villains of whatever sickness they're riddled with, or therefore help them and give a second chance. Let them redeem themselves and reconcile. However, at the end of the first game, we see Aunt May die as a result of Doc Ock releasing the Devil's Breath. Going into his fight with Doc Ock, Peter feels helpless. He just fought the Sinister Six, and he got completely clowned on by them. He knows that May is infected by the disease, and he knows Doc did it. So he goes in with a lot of emotions, but Doc hurt somebody that Peter loved, whether intentionally or not. Not to mention the trauma of the betrayal from Doc Ock as well. Peter ends the fight able to help Doc Ock, leaves him there because of this betrayal and the hurt that he caused. Now, Peter could have helped him to recover from what happened in Doc's brain, but instead left him there to rot. Now, whether he was looking out for the city in that moment is up to interpretation. I would argue to an extent, yes, he was looking out for the city and trying to protect the city by not helping out Doc. I think that in that moment, emotions of what had gone on were a way bigger driving factor in that decision to leave him there than trying to protect the city. Peter is also seen to brush off what others may contribute. During the first game, MJ goes into one of the AIM camps to try and get a news report and help out Peter, but instead of being thankful for this, Peter gets upset with her and discounts entirely what she's trying to do. Yes, what MJ was doing was extremely stupid, and she shouldn't have done it, but Peter doesn't appreciate her for what she was trying to do and her intentions in that, and rather focuses on potentially losing her. Which, yes, it's okay to be concerned with the well-being of someone, but to completely discount what they're trying to do for you, even if it is wrong, is just not right to do on your part. We see this even further in the second game when, before Peter even has the symbiote, he never takes Genki and his contribution seriously. Brushing him off as just kid. Peter's rude about it too at times, practically telling Genki to shut up and just do what he's telling him to do. Peter even pushes away Miles when he has the symbiote, someone he leaned on heavily before and after the symbiote. The kid that Peter trained up to be his successor, who Peter obviously loves and cares for. The kid that Peter left New York to for an entire month while he was out of the country. Peter leans on Miles so heavily in these games, considering not only another Spider-Man, but also a friend. Their dynamic is so wonderfully crafted here, truly tell just through their dialogue they do consider each other friends. But when Peter has the symbiote, he treats Miles like a kid again, like he has nothing to add. This builds and builds throughout the game until the climax when Peter finally takes the symbiote off. Likewise, Nebuchadnezzar, after being told what his dream means by Daniel, brushes it off and starts to attribute the splendor of his kingdom to himself. The kingdom Nebuchadnezzar reigned over was a gift from God. Therefore, God deserved the glory, not the prideful Nebuchadnezzar. This eventually results in him grazing the fields like an ox for 7 years, leading to humility from Nebuchadnezzar and the re-establishment of his kingdom when he recognizes God's glory. Peter, throughout his time with the symbiote, thinks he can do everything on his own and doesn't want the help of others. He wants to be the hero, to get the glory from saving people, and he wants it to be known that the suit makes him stronger. He literally says at one point, the suit makes me a better Spider-Man, and if I'm a better Spider-Man, doesn't everyone benefit? And he gets into an argument with MJ and Harry where Harry is begging for the suit back so that he doesn't die. And Peter just refuses to give it back because he's so concerned with being this hero, and he's so concerned with being the best Spider-Man that he can be, and so concerned with keeping this suit because he feels that without the suit, he isn't anything at this point. And ultimately, all of this shows where Peter's heart truly is. With the suit, he doesn't care about Harry healing. He only cares about being the best Spider-Man he can be because he feels the city would fall apart without Spider-Man. When Paul talks about pride in Philippians chapter 2, he counteracts it with humility rather than just telling the Philippians that having pride is wrong. Specifically, Paul is talking about having selfish interests just like Peter did in this case. Paul tells the Philippians to, in humility, count others more significant than themselves. Then he gives the ultimate example of this, which is Christ himself. He commands for one mind among them, and that mind is in Christ Jesus. This passage paints a beautiful picture of who Christ is, but is also a wake-up call that we aren't the most important people on the planet. Our neighbors are. We have to do what we can to serve others and count them as more important than ourselves, but pride gets in the way of this. When we're so blinded by pride like Peter is, we neglect to help others around us, especially those we love, which also is hurting them. Fortunately for Peter, eventually he is captured by Kraven, who intends to fight Peter and hopefully be killed by him. Kraven's entire motivation is so fun when it's done right, like it was in this game. Kraven is dying of cancer, and he wants to die what he considers a true death. And it's the same idea as Vikings wanting to die in battle with their axe on them so they can go to Valhalla. Of course, Kraven's not a Viking, but his motivation is similar in that he wants to go out and battle, not to cancer, but to an opponent who is best of him. This is a death he sees as having a lot of glory in it. When Peter finally breaks free of his cage that Kraven trapped him in, Kraven hunts Peter, and there's an extremely fun boss battle. Halfway through though, Kraven gets away and Miles is stuck there trying to calm down Peter, because by this point, the symbiote has pretty much completely overpowered and taken over Peter. It takes Miles giving him a pretty good beating and talking to Peter through the symbiote to get it off of him. This part of Peter's arc is resolved here, and the rest of the game is spent trying to reconcile for how he treated the people around him, eventually leading to Peter deciding to retire and just leave New York to Miles Morales for the time being. Peter's time with the symbiote shows how addiction can change people, and again, this is a topic discussed all of the time, but a part of this addiction for Peter is his pride. That's what the addiction itself is bringing out in Peter. When he does get the symbiote off, he immediately is back to himself, but that doesn't change what he's done and how people view him. It's hard to unsee someone as a person who only cares about themselves after they've proven that that is a part of their character. After all, the common belief is that the symbiote, rather than adding new personality traits to someone, accentuates what was already there. Now, public in the story doesn't know this, most believing that this is just a new suit for Spider-Man like any of his other suits that he has. But those who do know about his true origins would see this as a part of Peter that is suppressed in some way. So either way, people are looking at Peter as this pride and all of the attitude that he had and the aggressiveness that he had was just a part of who Peter is rather than the symbiote or the suit itself. In the third act, MJ is turned into Scream. We see a very similar situation happen. Her and Peter get into a fight outside of Aunt May's house in Queens, and the entire time MJ is berating Peter with everything that is on her mind, questioning if Peter truly cares about her. When it's all said and done, the things that MJ says with the symbiote are how she truly feels, and Peter still heard that and he still understood it. In the same way, all of those that were around Peter when he had the symbiote saw these deeper parts of Peter. This relationship between Peter and the symbiote isn't a true symbiotic relationship. Only one of them benefits, which is Venom. Peter struggles and is slowly silenced and loses control to the symbiote as time goes on. The clownfish has no more control than the sea anemone. Both benefit and they live together, only helping one another. The symbiote and Peter are fighting for control the entire time, and Peter never benefits from it other than just being physically stronger, which in Peter's case could actually end up being a drawback because of his no-kill rule as Spider-Man. Now, the lesson here could be just pride is bad. Don't be prideful. And yes, that would be a good thing to take away from the story, but there's always more to it than that. Jesus in Luke chapter 18 tells us a story about a Pharisee and a tax collector. In the days that Christ was physically present on earth, Pharisees were religious leaders for Judaism who followed the law to the letter and dot, constantly boasting in their obedience to the law, but never recognizing where their hearts were. They bragged about their works to God and to others looking for praise and attention. The tax collectors, on the other hand, were almost universally hated, taking people's money for the government and in some cases taking more money from them than they were supposed to. However, Jesus uses both of them for his parable. They both go to the temple to pray, and the Pharisee spends the entire time boasting about his obedience to the law, makes comments about being grateful for how great he is in comparison to others, including the tax collector that's right next to him. However, the tax collector is in a humbled state, recognizing his sin and his inability to do anything greater than what God can do for him. Christ then says the tax collector is the one that leaves the temple justified. Christ is illustrating that our hearts are the problem, not our obedience to the law. Following the law this way leads to pride, as it did for the Pharisees, and the more prideful we get, the more we think we can do it all without God, which is just a blatant lie. The law was put into place to highlight how much we needed a savior and to push our hearts to be in alignment with what God desires for us. However, those like the Pharisees saw following the law as more important than following God, seeking salvation from it in all that they do to follow it. Ultimately, it goes back to what Paul says in Philippians, and once again, Christ is the ultimate example of humility, and he was obedient to what the Father asked of him and obedient to what the Father asks of all of us, which is serving others. Peter does this after he loses the symbiote by keeping the symbiote away from Harry. Peter knows how much it will change and hurt Harry, so he keeps it from him, trying to destroy it. He's concerned with Harry's well-being more than he is with Harry being mad at him for getting rid of the symbiote. What we can learn from Peter's story is not only the dangers of pride in our own walks, but also the walks of others. But how do we avoid pride? That's something that everyone who will ever walk this planet is going to battle with until the day that they die. Pride isn't something that we can ever fully conquer. There will always be a part of us that takes pride in something. The goal isn't to be perfect as Christians, being the best Christ follower the world has ever seen. The goal is to simply walk with Christ, obeying him to the best of your ability, loving him and loving others as he loved all of us. Practically, this can look like being happy for a friend when they get a new job, or a relationship, or anything you may also want, rather than just being jealous of them. Doing what you can to serve others, whether that be at church, school, work, or even at home. And the biggest thing is just being someone who represents Christ, and not only how you speak, what you say, but also what you do and how you conduct yourself. In all of these, the main takeaway is that your focus is on others and ultimately on Christ rather than yourself. One of the biggest things I've had to learn recently is that our walks with Christ, being obedient to him, are more important than doing all of the ministry and service that you can. Following Christ as Lord and Master in your life will naturally lead to the humility you need to properly serve. We aren't Spider-Man who can swing to any point in New York City and save a random civilian from being robbed on the small scale, and on the big scale, stop 6 animal-themed villains from raining terror on the city. Can't be everything for everybody, serving at every opportunity we can. There's a level of pride to that thinking that tears you down and destroys your ministry to others. Christ is our superhero we must rely on and serve. Do that and do it out of love for him and obedience to him in the the rest will fall into place.